Hey there, it's Barry Shawns, founder of Mobile Audio Academy and the author of Crossover Curving. I am out in my car in the rain, and I just want to kind of give you a little bit of the setting and some backstory about this vehicle and what it's meant to me for a decade now. And I'm going to then get into the topic of troubleshooting, because I'm sure you've all had a problem where maybe it's not even your audio system in your car. Maybe you've had a smartphone for a couple of years and you're wondering why the heck does the battery die in 4 hours instead of 10? So you go to Google and you find out, okay, batteries don't last forever. Maybe it's time for me to get a new phone. So, that kind of simple thing, I'm sure you all can relate to. I've had this car, like I said, for a decade. It came into my life at a really big transitional period. My previous car had become extremely unreliable. I had to move from one city back to my hometown. I didn't get this car because it was, my dream vehicle. It was just, I had a few options. I'm grateful for that. And this has become a very reliable vehicle. I've got a lot of history with it. If you've been familiar with any of my videos over the last 7 or 8 years, which is unlikely, but you can check out on my channel, I've documented having this interior in particular basically completely removed. I have done some pretty mission critical repairs under the hood. I think I'm now on the 3rd battery, and that's again just like the smartphone thing, they just wear out. So and as far as the audio system, since very shortly after I got the vehicle, I've had basically no original audio system parts, and I've been blessed to have a lot of opportunities to try different equipment, different head units, different amplifiers, different speakers. Kind of the foundation of what keeps it all going would be the electrical system, the wiring that I've added, the distribution blocks and whatnot. That's largely stayed the same over many years. And so you put over 100,000 miles on a vehicle, and most of those miles have had a fully aftermarket audio system. You become really in tune with what's normal behavior and what is not normal. I've had amplifier issues where 2 times I determined I had to do return the amplifier to the manufacturer and get it actually swapped out with a new one. The most recent failure, which is a new failure for me, actually, surprisingly, with all my years of hands-on experience with mobile audio systems. What happened was I'd be driving the car and the subwoofer, the bass would go away first, and I've got a remote level knob which has a power indication light on it, so I know for sure that the amplifier was actually shutting off, and then the rest of the speakers would go silent too. So the sequence would be no bass and then completely no audio. The head unit was still on, it was still playing music, it didn't get paused or muted, and then the subwoofer would come back on. I'd see that power light come back on, and then I'd hear the rest of the speakers turn on. So my thought process is, okay, I've got 2 amplifiers. They've been really stable, and something has happened, I'm assuming, with the power delivery, not with the signal as in the music signal between the head unit to the DSP or the DSP to the amplifiers. this kind of actually continued over several weeks, the same repeating behavior. And it didn't seem to matter if I was cruising like at highway speeds or stopped at a traffic light and the engine was just idling. It didn't seem to be dependent on the speed or the RPM of the engine, meaning it didn't seem to matter if the alternator was loaded down or not. So I had all these thoughts going in my head, like, what the heck am I supposed to do? Is this a bad alternator? I mean, I've certainly got the miles on it for it to be at that stage where it's just end of life. So I'm thinking, okay, let me Google an alternator. Right now, they're under $100. That's not a big deal. If I have to replace it, then so be it. I mean, I've had to replace a lot of parts in this car. But I wasn't satisfied with that. I do not like, and I don't advocate the approach of just swapping out parts and hoping that it handles the problem. That's what the uneducated technician does, and that's not how I do things. I want to troubleshoot it. So I kind of just tolerated this really annoying, like super frustrating, aggravating problem with my audio system. This system that's been super stable and reliable for years. I mean, I've hardly touched things, and I think I'm going on 3 years since I did major changes. So anyway, when it came time to actually putting a voltmeter to the system, I went kind of from the back toward the front. And now what I mean by that is considering the back to be where the amplifiers are located. I went back to the distribution block and I measured voltage there with the engine on and idling. The car was parked, of course. I know that's dumb. I'm not gonna go climb back in the trunk while somebody else is driving the car. Anyway, that's just a silly idea. So, you would expect something about 14.1, 14.2 volts at idle with a healthy charging system. I got 11.9, like, damn! Okay, we have something really wrong. We got a big time voltage drop. So my next thing was to just go and pop the hood and go to the inline fuse holder. I checked 2 different places to measure the voltage, and I immediately discovered that something had probably gotten corroded at the fuse holder, because I had, again, 11.9 volts after the primary inline fuse going directly to the post attached to the positive battery terminal. I had the normal, 14.1, 14.2 volts, something like that. I determined we had a voltage drop there. And another note about that, when you're starting at less than 12 volts, and let's say the amplifiers are designed to operate between 9 and say 15 volts, it's really not hard to imagine that it could drop down to that 9 volt lower threshold, and that was triggering the amplifiers to have their protection circuits come on, where it cuts off the amplifier until the voltage rises to a sufficient level. So I could understand, I'm just, okay, I clearly have something going on. I know where the problem is happening, and I just immediately decided that day I am going to get a new fuse holder, and I'm not even going to bother with trying to maybe clean this one up, because it's been in the car for a really long time. A fuse holder is not very expensive. We're looking at a drawing I did. This is the electrical or the charging system diagram for my current audio system as of May 2020. Draw your attention to the summary. There is a factory original alternator rated for 90 amps. I've got a Duralast Group 75 AGM battery from AutoZone. The power and ground cable is by Tsunami, oxygen-free copper 4 AWG. At the battery there is a Stinger ANL fuse holder. Close to the amplifiers in the trunk we have a T-Spec fused distribution block and a T-Spec ground distribution block. And then the last thing is the augmented chassis ground return path. Now this is the front of the vehicle. Of course we're looking top down. This is the representation of the Stinger inline fuse holder. It's installed close to the battery as the best practices dictate. And then what's going on in this little inset is a photograph of how I did the underhood portion of the augmented ground path. What this cable is it's coming from the back end of the vehicle, bolted to the same point as the factory battery ground is a 4-gauge OFC cable to ground the battery. So the current flow is as unimpeded as it can be. Moving toward the back of the vehicle, let's refer back again to the augmented chassis ground. The cable toward the front of the vehicle is bolted to a chassis ground. This is actually, I pulled up the bottom seat cushion in the back and I found a section of the chassis where it is not part of a glued body panel. And what I mean by that is when I pulled up the carpet to do apply vibration damping mat, I found the chassis at the floor is divided into these sections that are welded and glued together. Ultimately, that is the reason why I decided to do this ground return path. As you have probably already figured out, this other ground cable is going back to my distribution block as shown right here. To wrap this up, we have a bass amplifier, 4-channel amplifier for the tweeters and mid-bass woofers in the front. I have a DSP that is controlling the crossovers, individual channel levels, and EQ for each individual channel. This is the fused distribution block, and that is your overview of my charging system upgrades.